urgent flight from Ottawa to Mexico City carried more than just Canadian government ministers. It represented a fundamental shift in North American diplomacy, as Prime Minister Mark Carney's administration scrambled to forge new alliances in the face of escalating trade tensions with the United States. The delegation, comprising senior cabinet members from trade, energy, and finance portfolios, arrived in the Mexican capital with a clear mission: to explore how Canada and Mexico could work together to weather the storm of aggressive USA tariff policies that threatened to reshape the continental economy. The timing of this diplomatic outreach could not have been more critical. President Trump renewed tariff threats in June 2025, suspending trade talks with Canada, a move that prompted the Canadian government to rescind a planned tax, just days before it was to take effect on July 1. This latest escalation had sent shockwaves through Canadian boardrooms and government offices, forcing Carney's team to accelerate contingency planning that had been developing quietly for months. The Mexico mission represented the most visible sign yet that Canada was preparing for a potentially prolonged period of USA trade hostility. Energy cooperation emerged as the cornerstone of the Canada and Mexico dialogue. With both nations recognizing their complementary strengths in the sector, Canada's vast oil sands and hydroelectric capacity could pair naturally with Mexico's growing renewable energy infrastructure and strategic geographic position, connecting North and South American markets. Mexican Energy Minister Sofia Ramirez welcomed the Canadian delegation with enthusiasm, noting that Mexico's recent investments in solar and wind power created opportunities for Canadian engineering expertise and clean technology exports. The discussions centered on joint ventures that could reduce both nations' dependence on USA energy markets while creating new revenue streams, independent of American trade policies. The crown jewel of Canada's international investment strategy, the Maple 8 pension funds, became a central focus of the Mexico discussions. These 8 largest Canadian pension funds, which utilize a direct investment approach and internally manage their own assets and portfolios, controlled over $2 trillion in assets that could be strategically deployed to strengthen Canada and Mexico ties. Representatives from the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board and the Quebec Pension Fund System met with Mexican infrastructure officials to explore opportunities in everything from renewable energy projects to transportation networks that could benefit both countries while diversifying away from USA-dependent investments. The looming USMCA review process, scheduled for 2026, cast a long shadow over every conversation between Canadian and Mexican officials. Both nations understood that President Trump's threats of 25% tariffs on their imports represented more than mere negotiating tactics. They signaled a potential fundamental restructuring of North American trade relationships. Canadian Trade Minister Rebecca Chen and her Mexican counterpart spent hours mapping out coordinated strategies for the upcoming negotiations, recognizing that a united Canada and Mexico front could provide crucial leverage against USA demands for more favorable trade terms. The discussions in Mexico City revealed the depth of planning that had been occurring behind closed doors in Ottawa. Canadian officials had spent months analyzing trade flow data, identifying sectors where closer Mexico ties could offset potential USA market losses, and developing investment frameworks that could quickly mobilize Canadian capital toward Mexican opportunities. The automotive sector, which had been battered by recent trade uncertainties, emerged as a particular focus area where Canadian parts manufacturers could potentially redirect supply chains toward Mexican assembly plants, creating integrated production networks that bypass traditional USA routes. For Mexico, the Canadian overture represented an unexpected opportunity to strengthen its position in North American trade dynamics. Mexican officials had watched nervously as Trump's trade rhetoric intensified, recognizing that their economy remained heavily dependent on USA markets, despite efforts at diversification. The prospect of deeper Canadian partnership offered a chance to reduce this dependence, while gaining access to Canadian technology, capital, and expertise in sectors where Mexico sought to expand its capabilities. President Claudia Sheinbaum's administration viewed the Canadian outreach as validation of Mexico's strategy to build multiple partnerships rather than relying solely on its giant neighbor to the north. The pension fund discussions took on particular significance as both countries recognized the power of patient capital in building long-term economic relationships. The Maple 8 funds, with their reputation for sophisticated direct investment strategies and long-term thinking, represented exactly the type of capital that Mexican infrastructure projects needed. Canadian pension officials explored everything from renewable energy facilities in Mexico's northern states to port modernization projects that could enhance trade flows between the two countries. These weren't merely financial investments, but strategic partnerships designed to create lasting economic interdependence that could withstand future political turbulence. Behind the formal diplomatic discussions, a more personal dimension of the Canada and Mexico relationship was developing. Canadian businesspeople who had relocated to Mexico City over the past year, fleeing uncertainty in USA markets, found themselves serving as informal ambassadors for deeper economic ties. Companies like Toronto-based renewable energy firm Solar North had already established operations in Mexico, demonstrating the practical possibilities for expanded bilateral trade. These early adopters provided real-world case studies that government officials could use to build broader support for the emerging partnership. As the Canadian delegation prepared to return to Ottawa, the foundation had been laid for what officials privately called a North American hedge strategy, a comprehensive plan to reduce dependence on USA markets through deeper Canada and Mexico integration. The next phase would involve translating these high-level agreements into concrete business partnerships, regulatory harmonization, and investment flows that could provide both countries with alternatives to their traditional reliance on American economic dominance. Whether this ambitious vision could be implemented quickly enough to provide meaningful protection against escalating trade tensions remained the ultimate test of this new diplomatic gambit. But the wheels of a potentially transformative bilateral relationship had been set in motion across the conference rooms and corridors of Mexico City. This Canada and Mexico partnership could reshape North American trade forever, moving us away from total dependence on our southern neighbor and toward a more balanced continental economy. From renewable energy projects to pension fund investments worth trillions, we're watching the birth of a new economic alliance that could protect Canadian interests for decades to come. As the USMCA review approaches and trade tensions continue to escalate, these Mexico City meetings may prove to be one of the most strategically important diplomatic missions in recent Canadian history. If you want to stay ahead of these game-changing developments in Canadian trade policy and international relations, make sure you're subscribed to West is Best and hit that notification bell so you never miss our in-depth analysis. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand how Canada is preparing for an uncertain trade future. Because these strategic partnerships will impact everything from your job security to gas prices at the pump.